DOS gaming in the 90s revolved around three big names for me: Sierra, LucasArts, and Apogee. Apogee are probably most well known for giving birth to the Duke Nukem franchise, something which started out as a simplistic 2D side-scrolling shooter, before evolving into the type of game that modern-day feminazis would eat for breakfast. Duke Nukem 1 originally came on the now defunct 3.5-inch floppy disks, with no music and basic sound effects. The levels could be pretty confusing at times, but overall it was fun to play, and I can remember spending a lot of my free time blasting my way through this on my parents' Commodore 286. When Duke Nukem 2 arrived a mere year later, it made the first game look practically prehistoric. It had much better visuals, sound blaster music, crisp sound effects, and it was hands down a much larger and refined game. It wasn't until Duke Nukem 3D, however, when they cemented his character into what he would ultimately be remembered as.
Damn, I'm looking good. Shake it, baby.
It's often hard to explain how much of an impact older games like this had when they were released, but just imagine for a moment that the year is 1996. We'd had good shooters before this, we'd even had Doom, but Duke Nukem 3D was totally different. The premise wasn't entirely groundbreaking. Basically, Earth had been invaded by aliens and all of the women had been captured. Duke obviously has to come in and save the day, but Duke himself was highly original for the time. He was a protagonist who went to strip clubs, had a juiced up physique, watched pornos and spouted off endless one-liners as he blew away aliens with rockets, pipe bombs and shotguns.
I'm gonna get medieval on your asses.
Just imagine being a 13-year-old kid with that pubescent mindset, and you can see how much of an impact it had on us at the time. The Australian version was heavily censored with no sex, nudity or violence whatsoever. Basically everything fun removed from the whole game. Nice work, Australia. Luckily they included directions to uncensor the game on the back of the box. I think it might have even been the first time I saw boobs in a video game. But it wasn't just a game for horny kids. Underneath all the macho bullshit was a legitimately good game, with some creative weapons and incredible level design. Starting out with only a pistol, you'd eventually get a shotgun, chain gun and rocket launcher. These were standard fare, but it was the weapons like the freeze ray, which let you turn enemies into blocks of ice, and the Devastator, a fast-firing, explosive weapon that deals tremendous damage, that were real standouts. My personal favourite is the Shrink Ray, which lets you morph enemies down to pint size and squash them underneath your feet. All of the enemies were aliens, varying greatly in attack speed and damage output, with the pig cops probably being the most iconic out of the entire lot. I don't think there's been a Duke game ever since where they haven't been featured prominently. As was the standard back then, the game was broken up into episodes, in this case, 3 of them. The first one was set in Los Angeles, the second in space, and the final in the fictional Shrapnel City. Each episode featured the same lineup of enemies, though the first episode had something of a limited roster, as it was also widely released as the shareware version. All 3 episodes are really well designed and have clever and intricate level layouts, and they were mostly modelled off realistic locations like city blocks and prisons, making them seem a lot more believable. The maze-like layouts of games like Doom and Quake had been replaced with environments that had a structural layout and felt like they served a purpose. A standout in the first episode is one set on Death Row, where you have to escape a maximum security prison. I can finish it in a matter of minutes nowadays, but back then it would have taken me hours to find my way out. It all ran on the build engine, which allowed for a high level of interactivity that is still impressive to this day. You kick a toilet, it breaks, sending out a jet of water. Smash a mirror and shards of glass fall across the floor. Or jump out of a pool of water and watch as it leaves wet footprints. You can interact with light switches, security cameras, urinals.
Much better.
It even had destructible environments to an extent. This level of detail carried across all of the game's original 3 episodes, and there's a very high level of polish throughout. The only episode I just flat out don't like is episode 2, mostly because the whole episode is really depressing thematically, but also because it introduces the sentry drones, who may be the most annoying enemy in the entire goddamn game. There's usually only 3 or 4 of them at any given time, and their only attack consists of beelining straight towards Duke and blowing the fuck up. These mechanical pricks are the main source of my frustration in Duke Nukem 3D, and even almost 20 years on, and they still give me the shits. Duke Nukem also eventually received a series of expansion packs, each with a different theme. The only official one out of all of these was the Atomic Edition, which comes with the new 4th episode, The Birth. The Birth is significantly harder than the other 3 episodes, and instead of 8 levels, there's 11. This is really going to test your skills as a gamer, and it is a really good example of how brutally difficult FPS games used to be in the 90s. It doesn't change the gameplay that much, and all you really get aside from the new levels is a few new enemies and an alternate fire for the shrink ray, which causes enemies to expand until they explode into bloody chunks. It sounds better than it actually is, believe me. Life's a Beach is probably my favourite of the other expansions, mostly because it's the only true total conversion. Shotguns and RPGs are replaced with super soakers and coconut launchers. Armour and steroids are replaced with suntan lotion and hot sauce. You eat bananas for health and use credit cards to open doors. To top it all off, all of the enemies are suitably reskinned to fit the occasion, wearing sunglasses, Hawaiian shirts, and bouncing around on inflatable pool toys. Whilst blonde beach bimbos follow Duke around praising him for having big muscles.
You've got such a big muscle.
It's all good fun and the level design is top notch. Duke Nukem 3D can be a little bit cheap at times, with some hit scan enemies that are near impossible to defeat conventionally, and some environmental death traps are impossible to predict, but for the most part it really has stood the test of time as one of the greatest shooters ever made. The level design, art style and just balls to the wall action still holds up to this day, and its 2 successors, Blood and Shadow Warrior, are also just as timeless. The Duke Nukem 3D Megaton edition, sold on Steam, comes with all of the expansions thrown in together with the original game, and is by far the best version of the game out there at the moment. So with something as successful and popular as Duke Nukem 3D, you'd expect there to be a sequel, and sure enough there was. Though what ensued is one of the most notorious development cycles in the history of the gaming industry. Originally intended to be released in 1998, it was repeatedly delayed year after year, with a few measly screenshots or promotional images released every few months. Just when people were starting to lose interest, they released the legendary 2001 E3 trailer, which honestly looked fucking incredible. But once again the development seemed to stagnate and the game dropped off everyone's radar, and then when 3D Realms all but disbanded, it seemed hopeless. Until 2010, when Gearbox Software finally picked up the rights to the game, setting a release date of mid-2011. We would finally get to play Duke Nukem Forever in this lifetime, but would it be worth the wait?
Yeah, Duke, you totally beat their asses.
Oh my god. I was like so scared.
The story presumably follows on from the events of Duke Nukem 3D. During all that spare time, Duke's apparently built some sort of global empire, focusing on burger joints, casinos and strip clubs.
Hey there, boss man. How about we play a game?
Though he has been ever vigilant should the aliens return, setting up defenses in something referred to as the Duke Cave. Lo and behold, the aliens come back, at which point the premise literally revolves around Duke coming out of a 10 or so year hiatus to save the planet. The irony is not lost on me here. Now, Duke Nukem Forever got a lot of flack, and I mean a lot of flack when it came out. People just ripped this game a new asshole, and truth be told, while it may not be a good game, it is a good Duke Nukem game, if that makes sense. It's everything you'd expect in a game with the eponymous protagonist. The game starts off with a massively blatant dig at the game's development cycle, as Duke is getting fellatio from a couple of talentless twin pop stars dressed in matching schoolgirl outfits.
Duke? Was it any good?
Yeah, but after 12 fucking years, it should be.
The Ripper Cannon, Shrink Ray, Hollow Duke, and Steroids all make a return. New additions include Beer, which makes you punch stronger, and Duke's sunglasses, which now work as night vision goggles in darkened areas. You can lift weights, admire yourself in the mirror, hang out in strip joints, and flip through porno mags. Throw some popcorn in a microwave and watch the bag expand as it cooks. Blow off some steam with a game of pool, air hockey, or digital poker. And most props in the game move around through the use of the physics engine. Now compare this to any other shooting game released that year, where almost every in-game prop is practically nailed to the floor. The level of interactivity with these elements in the game world is pretty damn impressive, and there is actually an incentive to play around with them. Instead of a health bar, Duke has an ego meter, which can be increased by doing some of the aforementioned activities. Yeah, it's regenerating health and we all hate that, but at least they tried to justify it somewhat. There's some really well designed levels as well. Some of the standouts include ones where you've been shrunken down and have to navigate shelves and cupboards using condiments as cover. as you avoid being squished. Later in the game, there's also a really large, well laid out area where you're given free rein with a monster truck, launching yourself into the air as you cruise down destroyed highways and large canyons. It's a breath of fresh air after the cramped interior casino locations of the first act of the game. But just when you start to get into a good rhythm and you start thinking the game ain't so bad is when seemingly right on cue, something unavoidably bad happens. One of your pipe bombs bounces back into your face, you get insta-killed by an enemy you couldn't even see, or maybe the frame rate takes a dive into single digits for unknown reasons. Duke Nukem Forever isn't a very good looking game to begin with, but something that makes the visuals truly horrid is the abundance of visual effects like depth of field and ambient occlusion that just kind of clog the screen up as each effect is piled upon the other. If you are going to play this game, the first thing I'd suggest is going into the video options and turning all of this crap off. The game still does look pretty bad, but at least with all this stuff turned off, it doesn't look like the screen's been smeared with Vaseline. In fact, for one of the levels set in the alien hive, I'd say it's almost mandatory, as you won't be able to see a damn thing otherwise. Aside from this, the only thing I've got problems with is how sloppy the shooting can be at times. Weapons feel a little bit clunky and sometimes input seems delayed. Melee attacks can also kill you in 1 or 2 hits, but yet you can take 10 shotgun blasts to the face before going down. So yeah, what the fuck is up with that? But still, it's really not that bad. It's just one of those games that I think people like to talk shit about without considering all the factors that go into it. And it sure isn't the worst game ever made. It's not even the worst game of 2011. I think that award goes to Brink. So I'd say play it, give it a shot, if only to defy the hordes of other people on YouTube who act like it's some sort of cancerous growth on the gaming industry.
Christ, what a fucking pussy.
There's a line early in the game where someone says that Duke is a relic from a different era, and this line pretty much sums up Duke Nukem in general. When Duke giggles like a frat boy every time he slaps a pair of wall boobs or picks up a turd from a urinal, you just feel like you have to kind of chuckle out of obligation. He's like that drunk friend that everyone has who thinks he's hilarious but he's really making an idiot out of himself. And you've been friends with the guy for so long that you just kind of put up with it while you shake your head. You know, this guy.
Now what? Shit finger painting?
But then on the other hand, if they turn him into some sort of sensitive philanthropist who worries about women's rights and being politically correct, then you take away everything that makes him who he is.
Suck it down.
It's the reason why we enjoy films like Commando and Big Trouble in Little China, but also the reason why they need to kind of remain in their own decade. Duke Nukem ruled the late 90s, despite how he shaped up in 2011. And whilst he's not my personal favourite, you can't deny he had a serious impact on the gaming world. Hail to the king indeed.